Well, hello there and welcome to another edition of The Big Q. Today we are talking about conservation and nature and the need for it to actually be a priority, not only for the country, but for you as our viewers. And that's why today I'm joined by Mr. Charles Karangwa, who is the country representative for the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Welcome to the show and thank you for making time to be with us, Charles.
Thank you.
Africa is trying to restore 100 million hectares of deforested and degraded land by 2030, which of course is the Africa Restoration Initiative. I will call it quite ambitious, which I'm sure you'll also agree.
It is
ambitious. Yeah. And we also know that Rwanda is part of the 26 countries that have already agreed to this challenge. So what's the difference? Okay, let's first explain to us what this initiative is all about before we move to the other challenge that's a global one, the Bond Challenge.
Thank you, Sonny, for inviting me to the show. Africa 100, actually we call it FR 100, it stands for Africa Restoration Initiative, which, as you mentioned, it's quite an ambitious target to restore 100 million hectares of degraded lands by 2030. And this initiative started in 2015, a couple of years ago. During the COP21, and this was really a time when people are trying to think about how do we deal with climate change issues. And this question of climate change was very much related to deforestation. Yes. And obviously it is. So Africa as a continent decided to put out this ambitious target. And the initiative is coordinated by NEPAD, which is one of the institutions in charge of development for Africa, but also have other technical partners that are supporting the huge movement to really be at work in Africa, including IUCN and the World Bank, among other institutions. So it's quite ambitious, as you mentioned, and obviously Rwanda, we joined that movement, and Rwanda decided to put 2 million hectares of our degraded and deforested land as a target to be restored by 2030. So remember, Rwanda's land has a total of 2.6 million. So we have we call it a border-to-border restoration target. We really want to see the whole country restored. And when we say restoration, we don't mean, we are going to plant forest everywhere, but we want to see zero deforestation and zero degradation by 2030 in this country.
And you think it's achievable?
It is achievable. Yeah. This country has achieved a lot, and we believe this ambitious target is also achievable.
Let's talk about the Bond Challenge, which I think ties as well to the Africa 100,
Indeed.
Which is the global side of it, right? So how does Rwanda come into this, and how do you as well come into this as an initiative?
That's a good one. I think it's good to go back in 2011. And I will come back to actually how does Africa 100 Restoration Initiative link with the Bond Challenge. So in 2011, again, different countries came together and they started talking about the issue of the world we want. And this world we want, IUCN, together with another partner called the World Resource Institute, conducted a worldwide degradation mapping. And they found actually there is significant amount, billions of hectares degraded. Worldwide. So, and remember it's called Bond Challenge because it was in Bonn.
Yes.
And different ministers was there trying to talk about climate change issues, but also the world and the future we want. So, and the commitment and the whole discussion started to say, let's make a commitment, a worldwide commitment to say we will bring 150 million hectares under restoration by 2020. And this was quite interesting. Our minister by then was Minister Stanislas Kamanzi, who was the Minister of Natural Resources, was in that meeting. And obviously he had in mind what is happening in the country, and he knew that degradation is a challenge. So that's where he confidently said, actually, Rwanda, we want to do a border-to-border restoration. We don't want to see deforestation. We don't want to see our soil eroding. We will restore 2 million hectares. We will restore the whole country. So Rwanda was the very first country worldwide to make what we call ambitious target.
Wow.
And there was also other countries joining, like Ethiopia, that decided to put in 15 million. And also other countries have really joined the movement. So that was in 2011. And during the New York Declaration, the UN General Assembly, they decided to, increase that target to 350 million now by 2030. So 2020 is very soon, and I'm happy that we already achieved 165 million hectares of commitments by today.
Across the world.
Across the world. In Africa itself, we achieved 91.6 million of targets out of our 100 million targets. So, and more countries are joining. So the target's already there. Now we need to really start putting this into practice. So the Africa Restoration Initiative is actually an implementation of the Global Bond Challenge. So it's the same commitment that was done in 2011 that we decided to bring to continental level, joined by other African countries, to make this 100 million restoration targets.
But what would you say? Where are we today as a country? 2030 is not very far. We already, let's say we're already close to 2019 as it is. So where are we? What have we restored so far?
Yeah, it's interesting because when we say restored, it's probably difficult to say we have restored, but we just simply say we have put under restoration a certain amount of hectares, and we just completed an assessment for the whole country, and from we took a baseline of 2011 to just understand how much land was put under restoration with this different type of restoration. Of course, when we talk about forest landscape restoration, we're also including agricultural lands with agroforestry. We are talking about riparian forest, forest on roadsides and rivers, and you saw a lot of investment in this country has really been put in protecting our riverbanks by planting the sides of the rivers. So in terms of where we are as a country, we are happy that Rwanda today reports to have put under restoration 680,000 hectares. Remember, we had 2 million commitment, so we still have a long way to go. We hope by 2030 we will have achieved the target. And the difference between restored and under restoration is under restoration because, of course, it's a process. Restoration is a long-term process to regain what we call ecological functionality. You have the entire landscape where it's really functioning. There's biodiversity in there. The landscape is productive. That's when you start saying it's restored. So it can take more than 15 years, but it's under restoration until it is restored.
It is done. Africa faces increasing resource challenges. Africa's population is expected to nearly double by 2050, increasing demands on already scarce soil, water resources, and of course, existing 65% of Africa's land is affected by degradation, which is at least 3% of the GDP, which is lost annually because of soil depletion of farmland. Take us through what this really means to us.
That's actually a good question, and I would bring that into the perspective of natural resource management as a whole. And Africa as a continent, as you mentioned, the population is nearly going to double by 2050. And the big question is, what does it mean for our natural resources? And forest and protected area will face more pressure, and probably more forests will be deforested, because the more population increase, the more we lose our natural resources. We tend to lose our natural resources. And actually, we don't realize how much we are losing economically by losing the natural resources, the forest, our wetlands, our different watershed, etc. And from the economic point of view, you already mentioned it, 3% of GDP lost. It's actually more than that. We recently concluded an assessment at continental level, what we call the economics of land degradation. From degradation alone, we are losing more than 7% of our GDP because of degradation every year.
Every year.
And we have done estimates of every dollar that is invested in restoration, bring back $5 as a return on that investment. So you can see already how much you gain economically by just investing in restoring your degraded area. And for me, restoration is not just forest. You are talking about restoring the ecosystem services, which is water resources. And let me mention that actually we are seeing a lot of conflicts in different countries related to land, to soil, etc. But in the coming years, there will be conflict related to water resources, because water resources will nearly be scarce and people will be fighting for water. And imagine if we don't invest in restoring and protecting this ecosystem service, definitely the agricultural productivity will suffer significantly, because we depend very much on rain-fed agriculture and very small scale, which is really rain-fed and limited irrigation schemes and across continent. So and obviously restoration brings multiple benefits. Beyond water, you are also talking about the energy. I mean, if Africa has to go green and stop using biofuels and other stuff, definitely we need to see hydropower generation as a source. And we have rivers, we have big rivers. But imagine a case where you have a river which every year have 40 to 60% of turbidity. So that soil damage the whole hydro systems, and it's a double of investments for an investor who is already generating hydro. In Rwanda, for example, we just did an assessment in one of the micro hydro power plant in Gisenyi, which was not functioning for about 7 years. And this one, I mean, the reports we realized was that at least every 2 years they have to buy new turbine machines, because there's a huge amount of soil. And the stones and everything that damage the system. So all those are investments. And obviously if you shut down the micro hydro, what does it mean for a country? What does it mean for the industry? What does it mean for the small businesses out there? All those losses could be avoided by just protecting the upstreams of the landscapes. And I didn't mention also agricultural productivity. I mean, the more we lose the soil, the more agricultural productivity goes less. And in this country, we are witnesses. We have landscapes where they are not productive. But by restoring them, by increasing the vegetation cover, by reducing soil erosion, by protecting the whole land through different agroforestry systems, you see the productivity coming back. And when we were doing assessment in Rwanda, for example, we realized that a restored landscapes, a farmland with a very good agroforestry, can double its productivity compared to a non-restored or a non-agroforested land. So there's a whole economic losses, but also there's a whole economic return and benefits if we decided to do those investments in restoration.
So basically it's a win-win situation for everyone.
It is.
Now the government of Rwanda, through the Ministry of Lands and Forestry, MINILAF, is revising the 2004 National Land Policy through the National Strategy for Transformation, which is now the country's national framework, planning framework, under which will be used at least up to 2024. So take us through these pillars and how will they benefit the country? What are these pillars that they're talking about here?
That's a good question, and I want actually to link this with the whole land use and land change. The biggest driver of degradation in Rwanda is what we call the land use change from forest to agricultural land. But also remember, Rwanda also population is increasing, and this means a lot in terms of urban settlements and other issues, pressure on land. So by revising the land use, the whole theory behind is really looking at what are the country priority and how does the land drive the development, the economic development of the country. So I mean, Rwanda we are a country which is always ambitious, and what I like about this country is we achieve far beyond what people expect us to achieve. So we set our targets, we set our goals, and we achieve them. So that's the biggest difference from other countries. So our new national strategy for transformation want to definitely transform the country economically, 100% of population access to clean water, 100% of our population access to electricity. That's actually a big driver of the human economic development, access to electricity. However, we want also to have what we call the green growth. The green growth means you are actually balancing, not even balancing, you are building on natural infrastructure to make sure your natural infrastructure supports other systems. And by investing in natural infrastructure, this is actually what we call protecting the environment. By definitely go green with electricity, go green with housing, urban housing and rural housing. So that's for me very important, and it speaks quite very well with our restoration and the whole the way how we use land. So if you look at clean water, we need water resources, and remember how much as a country we invest in cleaning our water resources. Just to try to visit one of the water treatment plant during the rain season. You will be amazed how much investment is being put in there. And go to some other countries like Costa Rica, where the cost of treating water is near to zero because people are getting clean water from the ecosystems. That's the same as I mentioned with electricity. So there's a whole link with our national strategy for transformation and how we do our land use, how we use our land, but also how we sustainably manage it by restoring it and cutting to zero degradation.
So hopefully this will also, once it's revised, of course, now by 2024, we'll not have to come up again with another strategy to finish up what we started, hopefully, because it kind of becomes a trend,
Indeed, and that's actually the trap we need to avoid by just always doing a review of the document, but not necessarily building or capitalizing on what lessons did we learn from the past. So we need to learn from the past to inform the future. And one of the ambitious targets we have in Rwanda actually is about agricultural productivity. We want to be a self-sustained country in terms of agricultural productivity. And that means a lot in terms of really land use, how we do land consolidation, but also how we cut to zero again soil erosions. Because soil erosion is an issue. That's why all over the country, look at the colors of the rivers. All our rivers. This maybe only the rivers in Nyungwe National Park. Other rivers are brown. They are full of soil. And that is the best soil we could be actually getting for agricultural productivity. So this is, again, it's a call for everyone. It's not really one single institution. It's everyone who is involved. It's smallholder farmers. It's the government, it's technical partners and financial partners. We all need to see this as a challenge and address it together.
Well, on that note, we do take a short break, but when we come back, we keep talking about conservation, but now we go into the economics about it. Like, what do you get by protecting the land that we are using today? So they'll keep it the big Q. Welcome back, and thank you very much for keeping it the big Q. I'm still talking to Mr. Charles Karangwa, who is a country representative for the IUCN. Before we went to a break, of course, he talked about the economics, and that's what we want to touch on. But before that, you talked about collaboration, coordination. And of course, during the IUCN assessment, if I'm not wrong, the recently concluded assessment found out a significant gap in stakeholder coordination to translate policies into actions, tracking progress, and achieving results. How do we break this, and how do we ensure we are on the right track?
That's a good question, Sonia. And this is a whole thinking, systemic thinking, we call it, or landscape thinking. When you look at a landscape, in the same landscape, you will see different things happening. You see private sector doing agriculture. You see a private investor who is in hydro. You see smallholder farmers. You see the Ministry of Infrastructure putting a road or putting another infrastructure system. They are the same people who are building houses. This is where, again, education is happening. This is the same landscape where, every single activity is happening. Even tourism activities are happening. So what does it mean to protect that whole landscape? It's everyone's role in that landscape to see that responsibility to restore it.
Restore it.
That's what we call cross-sectoral collaboration. And when we were doing assessment in this country, we found actually quite significant gap, as you mentioned. We have very nice strategic framework we're working, but when we go to the implementation on the ground, both implementation of our policies or our strategies, I mean, you don't see this coming together nicely in an entire landscape, and something is missing, obviously. This is talking to each other, delivering together, and delivering as one. That's very important. And here we just take an example. I mean, we have Ministry of Agriculture that is really looking into agricultural productivity, and we have a Ministry of Lands and Forests, for example, that is looking into restoration, forest management. We have Ministry of Disaster Management that is managing disasters, mitigating and mitigation and adaptation to that. We have Ministry of Infrastructure that is putting roads. So, and all of these pieces can, if we don't pay attention, contribute to either restoration or degradation. So how do we sit together to think about the landscape that we want as a country? So from agriculture, what do you want? You may need to do a lot of intensification. Yes, that's great. But how does it balance with other ecological functionality? With water resources? Do we need to put a lot of fertilizers? Remember, there's a downstream water resources that people are drinking. You need to, so there's all of those cross-sectoral thinking. And in Rwanda, I think we have good strategic frameworks and collaboration, but we need to see that functioning on the ground.
Charles, talking about organizations and collaboration and coordination, I'm sure you'll agree with me that when we go to these districts, we find lots of NGOs, CSOs, if I should call them that way. One is in charge of greening the district, one is in charge of forestry, like you put it. Who should control them, and who monitors them, and who should say you're doing the wrong thing, please close your shop, we need someone else to do this? Like, who should be controlling them despite having all these ministries?
I think that's a good question, and that speaks quite nicely with central planning versus district level implementation plans. Because for me, the district has a huge responsibility, and actually in Rwanda we have something called district joint development forums, which is there. But how do we make sure in the district planning there's all those packages together? Because that's actually where we see a lot of piecemeals, and people are just going into entire landscapes and everyone doing the same activity in one single sector, where we have other 4 or 5 sectors without interventions. How do we orient? I mean, technical partners and development partners, we want to be where we can see results. You won't plant a forest. If you make a choice, you will probably not go in the east. You will go in a place where you know a tree will immediately grow. But actually, even those forgotten sectors, I mean, in terms of greening and forest restoration, etc., they are our sectors. Smallholders are doing a lot of work to protect their land. We need to support them. So the district has a responsibility, and they're doing a great job, but they need to do really a real joint planning when it comes to, especially with the NGOs and partners. Because I remember when we were visiting, we saw almost 5 NGOs working in the same sector, doing almost all just planting, restoration. And I mean, we had other 4 or 5 sectors with no interventions. So how do we orient this? And this shouldn't be just coming from the brain. We need to do mapping, understand what are the degradation levels at district level, and then orient people where there are critical issues.
Tree planting. People talk about tree planting. Every day you wake up, you're like, have you planted a tree? You know, it's becoming a challenge, and we know you also have a day specifically for tree planting. But what kind of trees do you plant? Is that an issue? Should I just, pick one here, remove it, and put it there? Is that how it's supposed to work?
I want to, by responding to that question, to commend the work that the Ministry of Lands and Forests are doing, and by just really doing a real planning before the planting season. But one of the challenges we have in Rwanda, everyone knows, is actually we have a monoculture in forestry. We have more than 80% of our forest is dominated by eucalyptus. And what does that mean? We can easily think, it's very good. We have wood, we have timber products from eucalyptus. But remember, we also need to balance with our agricultural productivity, with our water resources, but also with the entire biodiversity systems. Very few birds will just build their nest into eucalyptus. Very few, because I mean, that's not their niche. They need to find their home into other indigenous species. So I think in the coming years, the government has already set targets to reduce the amount of eucalyptus that are planted and increase locally indigenous forest or species. It's a challenge because we need to get those materials. We don't have them. But I think there's a lot of work being done. And IUCN is one of the partners supporting the tree seed systems in this country to really try to bring what we call diversification of planting materials in forestry sector.
We've talked about planting of trees. We've talked about organization, coordination, and all priorities that need to be put in place. But maybe a viewer, watching us is asking, what do I benefit besides, planting a tree, which I know is good for climate, which, will help with the oxygen production and stuff like that. But the money, where is the money? Is there money in this industry? If I invest in water, cleaning of, what's in it for me?
I think we can look at that obviously at different levels. As a country, we want to reduce the cost we put in hydroelectricity in systems, because we are investing significant amount to repair, to replace our systems, simply because there's a significant sedimentation there. We need to reduce the amount of investment we put in water treatment. We need to really consider that as a challenge. And that's national level. And then smallholder level, remember, we have their agricultural production happening. And the smallholder, for them, they know the importance of trees, because they know trees fix the soil, and trees brings back the productivity, gives them manure, animal fodders, etc., etc. So all those are monetized, and they means a lot in terms of value or monetary value, because we can put figures there for every single ecosystem services that we benefit from planting and restoring degraded lands.
So 3 seconds as we sum up, Charles, what would you tell the viewer out there who feels you're just talking, this is just technical words for you, what would you tell them ahead of tree planting and the need to protect the environment and greening and plastic bottles and all that's part of the environment?
That's probably to sum up, as I mentioned, Sonia. I think number one, we have the nature today as a mother, and that's the only mother that you can't replace, and we need to protect it, we need to cherish it. And just by really not degrading and trying to reduce all the pollution using our plastics, as I mentioned, but also planting the trees. Also in Rwanda, we need more fruits. Let's plant more trees for fruits, and also more trees for really beautifying our house, our homestead, and our cities and our rural areas. Because when you see trees, actually there's life. For me, there's no life without a tree, and there's no tree without life.
Thank you very much for making time to be with us, Charles.
Thank you very much.
Well, I've been speaking to Mr. Charles Karangwa, who is the country rep for the IUCN Conservation and Nature, of course. And of course, he said environment, when we talk about trees, it's about life. It's not just about the country, but it's about you. It's about the fruits you plant. It's about the future and the generations to come. So do keep it the big Q, and do remember to keep sending in your suggestions on who you want to see on the show. My name is Fiona Mbabazi, as always, and do keep it the big Q.